Hello, everybody, and welcome to the April 2026 Inventors Gathering, which is a live meeting. We also post this on YouTube. Some of you will be seeing it after the fact. I'm very happy to have Victoria Jaqua, who is sort of by public demand giving a talk on public infrastructure, which is a continuation of pub talks that she's given before in this venue. This is a monthly meeting where we try to have a live experience where people can come talk about things with different speakers every month. Soon we will be talking about the biochar toilet run by Lawrence Kinchelow and others. I've placed a link here for the upcoming event I'm very excited about. Public Invention is having an in real life conference in Austin, Texas. It's not hybrid. You have to be here in person in Austin, Texas, on Saturday, June 13th. We have a lot of great speakers, some of them coming in internationally. The keynote speaker will be given by Dave Tipping of Kids OR, a very interesting public charity like Public Invention is. It's a Scottish charity, but we're a U.S. charity. And now let me introduce Victoria Jaqua, who's a very important person in the open source medical and humanitarian aid community. Technically, she's what you'd call a maven in the sense that she's a connector of many different groups and many different people. And she serves that purpose, which several other people serve it, but she really ties together organizations and people and helps people find each other who need to find each other. In particular, she is a board member of Public Invention, which is hosting this show. She's also one of the main motors of open source medical supplies. And I believe she's on several other boards and is assisting other organizations. She's also a product manager or product owner in the agile parlance of one of Public Invention's most important projects, the Global Distributed Tracking Project, where she's been leading that team for more than a year, providing prioritization and a connection to real users who may end up using that. So I'm sure I'm leaving some things out, but let me hand it over to you, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Rob. I will refer everyone to my LinkedIn, which will be showing up in the chat. Would love to have everyone follow me and connect on LinkedIn. And you can see all the different roles I'm privileged to serve in that capacity. So I will go right into the presentation. Okay. I'm very happy to come to you from Open Source Medical Supplies. I'm the Director of Development for Open Source Medical Supplies and the curator for the Open Source Medical Library that OSMS is very privileged to maintain. And today we are here to talk about public infrastructure. This is the third installment from the inaugural talk in 2023. And we're not here to talk about open source hardware, open source software, even open source philosophy. We're here to talk about how open source can help us see the world in a different way and maybe do things differently in the world at a time when the world really needs us to do those things. So what do I mean when I say public infrastructure? Public infrastructure is something that allows access to information and resources so that everyone can travel, learn, go through a building, access the information and the resources with no impunity, no restriction. A good example of this is the U.S. Postal Service. It's responsible for moving information all around the country. And if you can afford a stamp, you can access that infrastructure. Andrew Carnegie, in spite of himself, did an absolutely wonderful thing for this country, and he started the library system in the United States. And this allows free access to information and resources for the general public, no matter your age, your skill, or even your literary level. The road system in the United States is an example of public infrastructure. All of these roads equal information and resources moving at enormous speed and helping people get things done. And if you have two legs or maybe a car, you can access this information infrastructure. And even our public works, the bridges, the tunnels, the sewer system, the water systems, these are all examples of infrastructure that the public can access freely. Or if you're in a part of the world where you may not have running water, the infrastructure that is close to you does a good job probably of keeping diseases or other unfortunate things away from the rural systems that you do have. So we've talked about public infrastructure in a very broad, accessible sense. And now we're going to talk about the trends we're seeing in public infrastructure, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. And this can be public infrastructure that's maintained by a government, or public infrastructure that is maybe more private sector based or citizen based. We've gone from a rather open and accessible model to one that is slowly moving towards consolidation, where offices close, regional offices are understaffed, and constant pressure is put upon brands, governments, decision makers, corporate structures to constantly refine everything down to the most efficient and tiniest point. Now, this can be fine because consolidation helps you save money. It helps you route out inefficient ways of doing business, inefficient ways of, running an organization. But oftentimes it can go to such an extreme that you lose the original vision of the model. And you become so streamlined and so dependent on the consolidation finality that you have established a single point of failure. So the nice thing about consolidation is it's very traceable. If you put all your eggs in one basket, you know where they are. It's very good for central command and control, and you know where your infrastructure footprint is, and it's easier to maintain because you've consolidated everything. All the eggs are in one basket. And because of consolidation having larger access to capital, whether it's financial or labor, you have a really strong ability to scale. The problem is that the system is constantly moving towards efficiency and consolidation. You have single points of failure. You have compression that can lead to explosion or implosion. And you can get to the point where you are excluding access to your model. You have signal loss and you have loss of autonomy. In opposition to this, we have a distributed model. This is a model that is constantly happening in society. And it doesn't get looked at very much because we are so used to top-down, consolidated models being preached to us as the ideal way to think about an efficient model. So instead of many things going towards one end, a distributed model is many things autonomously existing in their space. So here we have some beehives in a field. They are spread out. They have millions of little bees in them. And those bees are going to go out and get their honey and their pollen, and they're going to come again and make honey. A distributed model allows many voices to be heard. There's no real single point of failure because there's many nodes in a distributed model. There's many people, many voices. You can pivot and respond very quickly, and you have a lot of autonomy as a member of a distributed model. However, this model is often untraceable and chaotic. And because there's so many individuals, it requires a large footprint to maintain it. Instead of one beehive, we have many beehives and many bees in them. And this is where information silos start happening, because everything is so autonomous and individual that it's hard to get everybody on the same page. And while a distributed model can be spread out and have a large footprint, it usually struggles to scale. So while we've talked about these systems, we should look at other systems that have been used in society. And we can look through history and see there's been a lot of attempts to govern, to have societal structure in some way, and they always fail. They may work very well for a period of time, but eventually there's a breakdown in the structure. It could be that there's greed. The people running them don't have ethics. Could be there's, a lot of secret handshakes and decisions being made behind closed doors, so people can't see what's happening, and there's a lack of trust, lack of transparency. Or you start out a system with a lot of reaction, emotion, ideology, but as you keep going, you don't really have an infrastructure that helps you scale. Most of the time, systems fail because information is controlled, decisions are hidden from the public, and scale is deliberately narrowed because somebody, maybe not the public, benefits from these decisions. So while we're talking about systems, we can look at us as humans. And this here we see a dissected human nervous system is all we have. This is us right here. These nerves and a set of eyes and a brain that lives inside a skull is the system that allows us to intersect with the world, to think, to make decisions. This is our innate system, and it allows us to create systems external to us. When this nervous system sees certain patterns, such as this crown shyness with trees, we get a certain feeling. We respond in our biology in a certain way. When we see the sundog, which is sunlight shining through the trees, when we see the bees in their honeycomb, these pictures, these patterns are not only full of information for us, but they give us a certain feeling. We understand them, we relate to them. And even when information is paused, if it's yet to bloom, or if it's been buried in the earth for millions of years, that information is still there. And we still have a biologic reaction to it. So if we look at the hydrologic cycle, we can see this movement of water, vapor, we could say information, all right? Everything's information to the nervous system, and how it forms a perfect cycle. There's no part in this cycle where the information stops and it hides. It keeps moving. It may pause a little bit. It does take a while for snowmelt runoff to get to the river, but it keeps moving, and it keeps fulfilling this perfect cycle. This cycle is the same as the open source public infrastructure cycle. When public infrastructure works, when open source works, we bring ideas, problems, needs for solution through pathways to where we kind of figure out what our big problems are. We try to create a system to solve those problems. We distribute those systems out, those answers, those solutions to the public, and we see what the public does with them. And then the public gives us feedback, and we bring those ideas and solutions back into the cycle. If your information pathways look like this, where the information is moving, documented, open, accessible throughout the entire process, you are creating open source public infrastructure. Everything that I'm saying is so important because the movement of information in an open source system is a fractal pattern. All of those pictures I showed you, the crown shyness, the bee in the honeycomb, the sundog through the tree branches, are all fractal patterns that our body recognizes. They make us feel good. We respond to them, we're drawn to them, and we're comforted by them. When people are exposed to those systems, they automatically fall in line. And if we start thinking about our open source systems in the way of a fractal pattern, we're naturally going to create functionality and desirable organization patterns that humans want. We won't have to force them to do something. We won't have to do horrible things to make someone do something that we want. Because when you present a fractal pattern, the human biology automatically wants to take part in that. So open source is really all based on showing your work. Like public infrastructure, like nature, it's created in the public, you can see it. It's tested in the public, you can see it. The workflow is visible to the public. Even if it's hidden for a while in the ground, eventually the public can see it. There's a public answer. And you have the ability to publicly iterate and preserve the answer. Legacy becomes very important. So public infrastructure supports the free and accurate movement of information, people, and resources. It's able to adjust systems. It has the ability to scale. When we think public infrastructure, we think massive road systems, public works, mail flying all around the country. It's not siloed. It can intersect and gain from other systems. It has longevity, and it's constantly providing access to resources. So when the public has access to resources and information effective to solutions, that is a definition of public infrastructure, which is also a definition of open source. So now we're going to switch to a topic that seems really wild to bring up, but I promise you it has relevance. We're going to be talking about celestial patterns. And I am not an astrologer, but I do follow astrology. I follow astronomy. And we're going to talk about how these patterns affect the future that we're going into. So this is a slide from last year. We have had some significant transits recently, last year and this year. The most important ones have been this year. We have Neptune in Aries, which has not happened since 1861. Uranus in Gemini is going to start the end of this month. And we are now firmly in Pluto in Aquarius, which has not happened since 1778. And you can look at these dates and understand historical correlations to when they happened before. We've also just completed a Uranus in Taurus cycle. And we're getting ready to start a Chiron in Taurus cycle and a Saturn in Taurus cycle. So Uranus in Taurus brought a lot of shock, disruption, new ways of doing things, to things that give humans comfort, the everyday things, food, clothing, housing, luxuries, comforts. And what's a good example? A good example is clothing. Look what's happened with clothing. Over the past, I would say 10 years, we've had the surge of fast fashion. We've had plastic clothing. We've had poorly made clothing that is sold to us as a good idea. And we have this disconnection from natural fibers. We have more access to clothes, but is the quality better? One could question that it is. We've also had a lot of resistance against large food brands and streamlined food chains. There's been more of an interest in regenerative agriculture, tracing your food supply chain and trying to focus on healthy food. These are all, hallmarks of Uranus and Taurus. And we've had all sorts of disruptions that it would take me a long time to discuss. Well, for a few months this year, we're experiencing Chiron in Taurus, and Chiron represents the wound or healing a wound. And from 27 to 2034, it is going to be firmly in Taurus. So whatever we experienced in terms of shock and disruption in Uranus and Taurus, we have a chance to heal that when Chiron is in Taurus. When Saturn goes into Taurus, we have a greater chance of restriction for resources or the need for multiplicity of resource access. So instead of getting all your groceries in one store, you may get your food from several different places. You may need to have jobs in several different places. Basically, what I'm trying to say is our experience with resources from now until 2034 is going to be wildly different than what we've experienced in the recent past. This means our food, clothing, water, housing, our ability to maybe sleep comfortably at night, to have air conditioning. Those things are going to be affected. There may be more choice. There may be restriction. There may be outages. We'll have to think about how we handle our resources differently. We also have some interesting celestial support because Pluto is out of bounds in the south from 2025 until 2035. And this is the last time this is going to happen for the next few thousand years. When this marker happens, there is a greater chance of reform, revolution, and that the people's voice will be heard. When this happened before, it was marked by the 95 Theses and the US Revolutionary War. Now, when Pluto's out of bounds in the north, there is a greater chance for the people to be overwhelmed and controlled, and for dictators and despots to have power. But when Pluto's out of bounds in the south, there's more chance for revolution. So when you see this marker, you want to think distributed model. People everywhere talking and doing something and being heard. So even though the future may be a little uncertain and maybe some scary things might happen, there's a greater chance that the voice of the people will be heard. And you can look at what happened in Pluto out of bounds in the north from 1938 and 1953 and see what top-down structures started during those time periods. So while Pluto is in Aquarius, we have a greater possibility for transformation, revolution, and also upheaval, meaning nothing can be remaining in the dark. It will be exposed in technology, data, top-down structures, and government. We can expect decentralization, fragmentation, networks, collectives, as well as people holding off into their own little tribes and siloing, cults, niche cultures, private clubs, while at the same time swimming in a sea of completely new ideas and themes. From 2027 onward, the background energy of humanity is going to change. We are coming into completely new combinations that humanity has never experienced before. it is sometimes hard to navigate or predict exactly where we're going, because even if we take certain celestial markers and say, well, this happened 2,000 years ago, or this happened 250 years ago, we have something that we think the world has never had before, and that is the internet and wide access to electricity. So information can travel so quickly in a way that maybe has never happened on the planet before. But from 2027 onward, a lot of big buildings that we're used to seeing be open and be full of resources are probably going to close. They might be a building that's in your town. They might be a building that's in a large city that is something that's always there. How could it ever close? There's a strong chance that building might close. And there's an enormous, enormous chance that humanity will experience a lot of disconnection. Could this be from Uranus and Gemini, where there's disruption to communication channels? Maybe. Or could it be from the elevation of decentralized networks? Because that's the trend we're going towards. It is less probable there's going to be large umbrella events with universal buy-in, such as a World War III. It is more probable there's going to be fragmented events with a localized buy-in. So if you're thinking along the lines of war, local skirmishes, things that start, stop, go again. What are we doing? They're moving really fast, but not enormous sweeping events. Trends, themes, but probably less likely that something like a World War III will happen. Localized effects as opposed to perhaps global. Now, after I say all this, it can be confusing, discouraging. What do we do? And I'm going to say the same thing I said last year, which is it's time to build. If you are building something, if you want to build something, if you have a thought of, I wish someone would build that, you need to build it. All of the energy that one could spend worrying or speculating needs to be completely streamlined into building in whatever capacity you can. Because we are in a time period where individual builders, new ideas coming out, are going to have way more of an impact than they have at any other time in history. And one could say, well, look at what happened with technology the past several years. We've had startups and SaaS and, all the, Silicon Valley, like people are always building. This is different. The building scenarios we're coming into are going to be very localized, customized, niche, and able to fit these really hard problems that no one else wants to fix because I can't scale that. It kind of goes back to a situation OSMS ran into in 2020, where people with disabilities needed PPE that worked with their body, but they can't go out and buy it because no company is going to make millions of a certain mask type per day, because the market share for that community is very low. They're not going to make something unless they can make 1 million of them a day. But the disabled community doesn't need 1 million of those masks a day. Maybe there's 100,000 of those people. These are the niche markets that are going to start coming up with solutions on building things that answer their specific problem. This is one of my favorite quotes. When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. And that is all of us in a distributed model in open source public infrastructure. For the future, Connecting people to resources without expectation of personal gain is the greatest act of resistance in the face of oppression. A lot of people wonder what they can do, what is useful, what should I focus on? And it is really easy to be overwhelmed with news, with information. Oh, if I do this, it's going to be bad over here. And people become paralyzed with indecision. Like whatever decision I make is wrong. This is always a good decision. And the most important phrase is the one between the commas, without expectation of personal gain. That is neutral. That is selfless. It's ethical, because you could lead someone to a resource, but you only want them to have it because you get a kickback. Creating communication at scale across distributed communities is the greatest value proposition for the next 20 years. We are coming to a time of enormous fragmentation, disconnection, silos, groups of people, states, neighborhoods, families, not talking to each other, being too busy, maybe. Maybe there's disruption in communication networks. Maybe there's an EMP that's localized. Maybe there's a grid failure that's localized. If you can create communication across nodes, across a distributed model, you are fulfilling the biggest solution needed at scale for the next 20 years. People are also hungry for the truth. And truth often equals safety. Transparent quality assurance, validation, autonomous verification. The self, what can I do to verify, instead of relying on a top-down structure? And reliable infrastructure is going to sell. So our general overall theme is possible resource discipline or restriction, but at the same time, multiplicity as well. New markets, new ways of getting things, duplicity of access. When we get into Saturn and Taurus, there's this strong chance of nostalgia. Like there's already a vintage secondary market craze, but there's going to be even more of an interest in this. And, you know, even for things that are made from like 2000 to 2010. And I think it's for a specific reason. I feel that markets are going to be restricted to the point where the secondary market might be the only dependable place where you can find the thing that you need. In addition, you need to find things that you can repair. In the past 10 to 15 years, we've had enormous planned obsolescence. You can't repair most things, but maybe you could repair things from 2000 to 2010, depending on what you need. We're going to be healing a lot of wounds from Uranus and Taurus. And there's going to be a really big desire for a return to standards, to boundaries, to things that are firm, that are transparent, that create the foundation of infrastructure. All of this is mixed in with the Pluto in Aquarius, which is all about the collective, the network, the self. How is the self part of the collective? There's going to be an enormous focus on how can we self-govern, whether it's an individual or an aspect of society. How can we self-audit? How can we create self-trust? And if we have enough individuals doing this, then we create a collective of trust that governs and audits itself. The reason why I bring open source into this is because the open source model understands distribution. As we go through these next few years and top-down structures start to fail, what we're left with is people that only know how to work within top-down structures. We don't have people that even really know what a distributed model is. Or if they do, they don't know how to scale it. But open source understands distributed models. That's why I believe for the next 20 years, Open source is the answer for what society needs and what they're going towards. And if you operate within that fractal pattern, open source can solve so many of the problems we have today. We bring transparency, a focus on documentation, and how can we preserve legacy? If you have your information hosted in a public repo, it doesn't matter if that thing eventually goes off the market. If you still have that information publicly accessible, that thing can be made again because the legacy of the information has been preserved. If we stick to this pattern, anything that you build is going to be successful. It has to be a free-flowing, accessible, visible system that constantly has a feedback loop into itself. This is all we have left. The other systems don't work as long as we need them to. The open source system is the only one we haven't tried. And it's the only one I think can preserve humanity over the next 20 years. To get there, though, there's a few things we have to do. We have to stop gatekeeping. We have to understand that the way open source grows is to allow more people to experience it, to communicate it better, and to stop thinking that the only people who can teach open source or have anything to do with it are the people already in the open source system. We should be nurturing this community and bringing more people into it and recognizing people's value, how they bring inputs. We need to learn how to scale. There are so many little open source projects that go to GitHub to die. And we look at them a few years later and there's nothing happening there. Now, the argument could be, well, if you funded it, it would scale. It would be a really big project. Well, sometimes the UI and the UX is not very good. And so you don't get any adoption. We should really be looking at how we're going to scale our products, because that's when we have a lot of people using them. And that's when it gets really exciting. Instead of building a new open source thing, maybe we need to help existing projects succeed. Maybe be a little less purist. Again, that goes back to the gatekeeping. And always come from a place of neutrality. Being in the medical space, you have to maintain neutrality because you have to be ready to care for the prisoner that comes in the door as much as the grandmother. And that's something that would be very, very helpful for open source to always maintain. Because when you have that, you have equitable access, no matter where the person's from or who they are, their literacy level, their age. Neutrality allows equitable access. And we need to understand what it is to be a public servant, because in a lot of ways, we already are doing that. But if governments are going to start to shut down certain things, who's going to do the work of being the public servant? It's going to be us. So what can I do? What are some practical things to think about? These are always good actions. Support that's misspelled. I just like that. Support the spread of helpful knowledge and resources. Preserve helpful knowledge and resources. And identify simple, verified knowledge that needs to be scaled. Something really simple like, how do we stay clean? How do we help others stay clean? How do we purify water? Well, hypochlorous acid is a really amazing solution to that. You can keep everything clean with hypochlorous acid. You can even fumigate against viral replication in the air with hypochlorous acid. And we have a really wonderful research proposal from our friends at Spherical Studio in LA on how we can prove that the hypochlorous acid solution we've made is the parts per million that we think it is. And how can we test that? a week later and know that it's at that same parts per million. This is something very, very simple that everyone should know about. We should know how to clean with hypochlorous acid. So these next few slides are more for discussion, but I will run through them very quickly. Who's going to do the work? These are usually the four sectors that can do the work. Government, which is expected to do a lot because they can scale, access to a lot of money. Private sector, access to a lot of money, but also not a public servant. They are interested in the interests of the private sector. The non-governmental, the nonprofit, wants to scale, very decentralized, fragmented, doesn't have a lot of funding, but has the passion and the drive and the understanding of the distributed model. And the citizen, who can be any part of 1, 2, and 3. Where do we need to work? Locally. The local becomes regional, becomes bigger than regional. Always ask, can the work scale? Because there's a lot of passionate people who want to start a project, who have a good idea, and you can often get a little overwhelmed with choice. Like, many nonprofits would love for you to volunteer for them. Many ideas would love to be developed. How can I know where my time is going to be respected or where it's worth the most? Well, look at the project from the angle of, can this scale? Is this person or organization focused on building? Do they have internal infrastructure or the ability to make that? As in, are they writing things down? Do they have documents? Do they have a traceability mechanism? Are they concerned about connection as opposed to siloing and separation? Is their immediate concern, how are we connecting and collaborating with other organizations and people? And do you have an infrastructure that is beyond emotion and ideology? Because that last line can be a good starting point. A lot of things in the world start because of emotion. Someone had a feeling. Nothing wrong with that, but you can't scale it. It can't go for years on just emotion. There's many people on this call who I know were excited. They're like, I would love to work with open source public infrastructure. I would love to take over these roles that the government is eliminating or consolidating. And I would love to do that work in an open source way. But who's going to pay for that? Well, when Pluto and Aquarius, when things are being exposed and decentralized systems and networks have more prominence, when you are competent at scale, you are going to be asked to do things. And there is going to be money for this work. And who is working right now? It's the quietest people. It's the people that are not on CNN. Some of them are not even on social media. You don't know they exist. It's the ones who are working so hard, they don't have time to talk about the work because they're building. It's usually the ones that are the quietest that are doing the most work. So I'm going to go to my last slide. In memoriam, one of my favorite pouched rats from Apopo, Ronan, as an example of the smallest creature doing the most impact for humanity, did pass away in February of this year. Now, he is just one in the team of pouched rats that Apopo has, but these little guys are just so wonderful to me because they keep humans safe, not just by sniffing out landmines, but they keep the human mine workers safe because they can clear so much land in a much shorter amount of time than a human can. I'm a huge fan of this charity and of the African pouched rat in general. So thank you, Ronan, for all your hard work. And we all can be like Ronan. Like, Who knew this little guy was out there doing so much work? Who knows that any of us are out there doing so much important work? We are doing it. We're all here. We're doing it. And that is the presentation. And we have time for discussion.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So you can just come off mic and ask a question, or raise your hand, or put a question in the chat if you like to present a question for Victoria. Well, let me open the chat here to answer this. How do you see open source model within capitalist system, or would it be anti-capitalist?
I know some people don't really like this when I say it, because I say this in a few meetings, but we can't really get rid of capitalism until the currency changes. And that's just the way it is. Currency is based on usury. Until usury goes away, we have capitalism. In the face of that, the way you combat it is having standards and ethics that are anti-capitalist. So if one of the definitions of capitalism is, I need to restrict access to resources because that will allow me to charge more for this product, then you do the opposite, which is, I'm going to increase access to this resource for a price that is not gouging. Does that make sense, Farah?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead, Paul. Paul, if you can hear me, come off mute and say hello. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria, for that. I'm curious about one of the last points that you mentioned regarding people who are working in quiet. When we're talking about top-down models, that also, includes a lot of the legacy platforms and legacy communication models that we use to talk about ideas such as these. So how do people who are working behind the scenes deal with excess noise? Is their signal going to increase because some of that noise will just be tuned out by people? Or will some of these louder voices leave the arena and then give space to voices that are more of the underdog right now?
People get tired of interacting with a non-fractal pattern because it can't scale and it's exhausting. And we're coming into a time when parallel communication methods are going to happen. There's going to be new platforms, new ways of communicating, parallel internets, not just one parallel internet, but maybe many of them. And maybe we connect them, maybe we don't. New places to speak, a greater desire for authenticity, and something that I can envision, like I can see far with this idea, like, oh, that makes sense to me and it's helpful to me. And you're not just trying to grab my attention so that you can work on your algorithm. Like there's actual exchange of value. And that's kind of something that Uranus and Taurus showed us is we've been given these objects, these things that are to provide us comfort and luxury every day. I go back to clothing. And we're told that it's valuable because it's cheap. And I can get, 10 shirts for $3, but you get them and it has no value because it's poorly made and the fabric is plastic and it doesn't keep you warm. And it just doesn't feel right because it's not a fractal pattern. People get tired of that. I mean, you can't, it's non-nourishing. So after a while, people start looking for different food. And I think both the Chiron in Taurus and the Uranus and Gemini are going to make that happen. Like, people are just going to leave certain conversations, certain mindsets, because it's not nourishing anymore. And that's when the quiet ones that have been doing the work and have always had value but didn't have a platform are going to become important.
So I saw Jonathan's question before I saw Jennifer's hand go up. So maybe you could answer the question in the chat. Love the concept of the fractal model. As an open source project scales, how can teams ensure the original mission stays intact?
You can put that picture on the team landing page. Like, where are we in this cycle? Because the way people get away from that cycle is they start hiding. And hiding usually goes back to being afraid. And afraid has a root of not trusting yourself, or not trusting that either what you're doing or others. And I think open source requires a little bit of vulnerability. I'm going to put this out there, and I trust it. And I know where this is going. I know where I am in this cycle. I know what I'm building. I can see this vision. We're going to get there. We're not going to put obstacles in our way. And the more you are creating transparency within your team and transparency with your public, it'll allow you to follow that fractal pattern. Because we do have points in nature where there's a pause. The seed is in the soil. You can't see the seed, but the seed eventually sprouts.
Joe Torreggiani's been an important part of the open source movement as well. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. First off, sorry I'm late to the meeting, and I'm sure I missed a great first half of the presentation, but I'm glad I was able to catch it. And Victoria, as always, thank you for presenting. Something I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm curious what you think. I think one of the challenges that you were kind of saying is, like, a lot of the people who are doing the work are building, and they might not be the same people that go out and kind of sell the thing, or kind of like, market what they're doing as this kind of, really important work. And I also think that there's like a challenge with this, like, who's going to pay for this thing? And I've always thought, what is preventing these kind of smaller organizations from getting together and pooling their resources? And also, it seems like there's some initiatives that kind of start with a good, open source thing, and then at some point they become a private. It's like the Redis DB, started out as open source and then eventually kind of gets co-opted. So how do we? And I totally agree. I don't think we can get out of working within the capitalist system if this is the kind of like the rails that we have. So it seems like we have to work within the system, but there seems to be some rule, which is at some point, the better you get at working within the system, it like corrupts you. And then like whatever you started out doing, you ended up kind of falling off the rails and not sticking to the standards you've set. So like, I'm curious on like what, how can we like create organizational structures that support these, humanitarian and environmental initiatives without them like, and be able to accumulate some amount of resources to support these other things without like, money corrupting the system and then being like, oh, we got to turn this into a business and, make more money. So yeah, I'm curious on like, how do we resist against the co-option of these systems so we can actually keep building without being disrupted?
Well, we have to remember that we're coming into combinations and opportunities that we haven't encountered before. So a lot of the struggles that we've had in open source are going to change, maybe disappear, maybe be solved. For instance, if, one of my arguments is we're slowly seeing government not be interested in maintaining public infrastructure. And people are asking, very plainly, well, I'm paying all these taxes. Why? What am I getting for it? And the Boundary Waters vote is a really good example of that. The Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness is possibly going to be completely sold to a Chilean-based metals miner, and they're going to sell the ore to China. So it's not even a US-based company. Huge problems. So if we want as a country to enjoy the public infrastructure that we've had, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't get rid of public infrastructure and say everything's fine. Who else is going to do the work? Why can't we have an open source voting system? Why can't we have an open source coded unemployment software that every state can access and is the same for every state? Why can't we have an open source version of like FEMA digital interface? We can have those things. And we're coming into a time period where I think open source people are going to be asked to build these tools because we need this public infrastructure. But we're in this dichotomy in the public where the public feels we should not pay federal workers to exist of a certain variety. So then the government's like, well, we still have to have this stuff, but we're not going to have a federal employee for it. We're going to pay someone else to do it. So they look to the private sector. Well, the private sector can only do so much because they're private sector focused. They're not a public servant. You can't take a corporate person and put them in a government job and expect the same mindset, the same outlook, the same output. It's two different ways of thinking. So who's going to be the public servant? Who's going to maintain this infrastructure? I believe it's going to be open source people. And I believe there is money and interest to make that happen. Because do you want open source security for your software? Well, pay the people to write it. And then in terms of struggle, we have a lot of, small projects and they don't talk to each other. Like, why do we have, 10 versions of this one thing? Are you guys talking to each other? Maybe we don't need 10 versions of that. Maybe we need one. But at the same time, do we need 25 Linuxes? Probably not. We need just one Linux. So I'm probably not answering the question here. I think that if you're going to maintain ethics and not be overcome by maybe the capitalist system, you have to structure your internal team in a certain way. GLIA is a really good example of this. GLIA has very strong standards and ethics about how they run their company. Public Invention does, even though it's not a company. There's a lot of standards and ethics around, here's who we are as an open source organization. We work in the light. So a lot of times it can come down to one-off situations, like maybe a founder dies and there's no legacy plan. Or, someone got acquired and, the board voted for that to happen. I don't know. It is hard for collectives to make good decisions, I will say. You can have weird things happen that you wish it did not happen to open source. But you have to make certain decisions. If you're a founder, if you're a board, if you're a project, what are the lines I'm not going to cross? And if I say no to this money, it means that I can sleep at night. I mean, we do a lot of things in medicine so we can sleep at night. Medicine is a lot of no. And no is very good. It's a thing to have. We can come back to this. Jen, go ahead.
Thanks, Victoria. I really do love your talks. I love the evolutionary perspective and evolutionary astrology perspective in all of this, and sort of like the bird's eye view of the way structures are changing. But I have a question about gatekeeping and transparency. I totally understand what you're talking about, but I do see that there's still a need to gatekeep, and in a way, and it's a balance. I find it's a balance. So, in terms of gatekeeping, I have for a very long time gotten all the public emails in GLIA. I see them all. There is so much spam and so many slick emails trying to get me to, give up information, or, and they're saying things like, oh, I just got one the other day from somebody from the UN who I actually looked into, and she actually is on the grant board of some UN. I can give you the details later. I don't have them right now, but I looked into it, and certainly this woman works for that, but it said like they had, $1 million to give us, and they're just fishing for bank information. I mean, I'm pretty savvy to this now. We have emails coming saying, oh, this is your HR department, which is laughable because we don't have an HR department. But it's really interesting. So I know what you mean about gatekeeping, but I do think it's still necessary. You want to screen bad actors.
Oh, yes. Okay. So let me define this. When I say gatekeeping, it does not mean that we don't protect our space, that we don't keep out bad actors, that we don't have discernment. Okay. Right. We only want to work with good partners. And there are organizations within the open source community that are not good partners, that are not safe, and you don't want to work with them. What I mean by gatekeeping is automatically assuming that you have nothing to learn from a personal organization that is not already in the open source community.
Right. And I think GLIA does a good job at taking in all information from everywhere, and not validating it in the sense that we think everybody's right, but just giving it the respect it's due, just in terms of even having the guts to stick vulnerable enough to say something, right? Like there was that guy that changed the tourniquet pieces, because he said, oh, they're easier to print. And we were like, oh, come to a meeting. We'll explain to you why we're not.
Yes.
But there was also me putting the brakes on accepting people into Mattermost. You know what I mean? And that was due to the fact that I was trained that way from Carrie to really, sort of think very hard about that as to whether that was. And you saw it happen. Like I did put the brakes on there. We had a lot of discussion around it. And then when we talked to Tarek about it, it was like, okay, that's it. Then it's and I can see how that has benefited everybody involved, letting, I can't remember what the group was, but it's the French.
It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. No,
has benefited us so much because it is really true what Tarek said and what you were working on too. It's all networking, right? And so, but it's just in terms of being that, like I said, being like a gatekeeper, I was like, should I open the door? Should I not open the door? I don't know.
Well,
open the door and there's the flood, and you're like,
there's open door, there's shut door, and then there's open door. Let's see what you do. Yeah. And if it's no good, then you go out the door. Yeah. Like sometimes you need more information. You have to let people show you who they are.
Yeah.
But that we develop discernment, and we are able to create that discernment by interacting with our partners, by people showing who they are, by showing up, by engaging, by helping, by sharing. If you're not sharing, if you're closed down, if you're only in a project for what you can get out of it, you probably aren't going to last very long in open source world. Like
Yeah,
you might use open source software and like it, but are you really part of the community? I mean, it's a whole different thing. Like,
it is a whole different
yeah.
thing. And I think this is where transparency and vulnerability actually becomes a strength.
Yes.
I got an email the other day where this person, and it was just a person, not an organization or anything, asked me some very pointed, numbered questions, wanting to know the registration number of the company, why we were not a nonprofit. Does all our money go to self-sustenance, or how much of our money goes to self-sustenance? And then, what the projects were we were working on. And actually, I'm remembering all of the questions. And the other one was like, what the breakdown of costs and where they went to. And I answered them. I started it with thanking them for their questions. I answered each question as openly as possible. But, I didn't write a book. They asked a lot of detailed questions, and I pointed them towards the website. Like, you want to know our project? Oh, here, there's our projects. I said all of our money goes to self-sustenance. Here's our number. So I did all, then I ended it with, I'm curious as to why you're asking. Is this personal interest, or are you like working on a project or something? And then nothing response back.
Yeah. Next time I would ask that question first before giving the numbers. Like, you can't just show up and interrogate people. What's always come at it from the standpoint of exchange of value.
Yeah.
Are we exchanging value here or not? Right. Okay, so we have more hands up. Justin, I saw your question here. You're thinking of distributed ledger networks that solve problems, scaled technically but missed adoption, in turn used up or lost funding. When you're talking ledger, are you talking crypto, Justin?
It can be. It doesn't have to be. But part of what Joe said and what you answered led to some of that. But basically, you can get all your stuff right. How do you get adoption? Because you've got the problem and you've got the solution, but is it, having government adopt it so that it's mass distributed? Because you can invent the greatest thing in the world, but if nobody uses it, you miss the point. So what's the best route that your plan is, or what have you seen, or do you have that? And there might not be an answer to that, but those are things that I watch. People do great things that go nowhere sometimes.
This is where astrology is very helpful to know where you are in the cycle. So Uranus and Taurus did a lot with our money. This was the time of the crypto craze. Now, of course, Bitcoin existed long before Uranus went into Taurus, but these past, 5-8 years, especially 5 years, we saw crypto peak. Well, one of its problems is it moved so fast because people were trying to get their portion of the pile. And I feel that the reason why those sort of systems struggled is because at the end of the day, they really didn't have value behind them. They were trying to sell something that we didn't really have a use case for, and we didn't have anything backing it. There's still a lot of questions about, who started Bitcoin. I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole.
Right. I'm not getting into crypto, but for example, you brought up voting. We can do distributed ledger in voting. We can do distributed ledger in medical records.
Right.
And there's, so not getting into the crypto point of it, but there are some incredible projects that spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing things that have now the funding lost because it didn't gain traction.
Yeah.
The money return was either they ran out of a kind donor, or there was a venture firm behind it with the capitalist aspect that in some way they would have got their return. Either way, it didn't play out in time. So how do you get that mass adoption that makes the juice worth the squeeze?
Once again, I think knowing where you are in a cycle in the world is really, really important. If you've made something that has value and it allows transparent documentation, on append-only records, shall we say. And it can increase quality assurance, and anybody can have access to it for, not a huge buy-in. Sometimes you have to wait for established systems to fail before a new market can emerge. It doesn't mean that your idea was bad. It means that it wasn't the right time. And the world is full of good ideas that were on a shelf until the iron struck. And this is kind of where open source is so important, because look at what happened to Tesla. Somebody else got all of his papers and did many things with them. But Tesla was a very open source minded person. He believed his thoughts and inventions should be free to the public. He believed electricity should be free to the public. And you just can't be having that in certain ways of thinking. So the important thing is to always document your work and have that legacy preserved in whatever way, because eventually the timing is going to shift. And something that was a good idea 20 years ago that never got traction will suddenly become very important if you have very clear value propositions. And sometimes there can be an idea and someone, there's 10 different groups all working on the same idea and one will hit. I can't tell you why one hits more than another. It could be that person had a Venus-Jupiter conjunct in the right house and it worked for them. It could be that they, met the right person on the right day and they got funding. It could be that their product scaled better and, everything aligned. But I think if you've made something that truly has value, especially if it is launched during a craze and you don't get adoption, when that craze goes away and the smoke clears, if you have created something of scaled value, it will still be important. And suddenly people will be interested in the thing that wasn't sexy back then, but is sexy now.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Rob.
My comment has been addressed. Are there any further questions?
I guess just that, like Victoria had mentioned, like, why can't we have an open source voting system? It's a really good question. And actually, Pia Mancini, who is one of the co-founders of Open Collective, she had started a project in Argentina where they did exactly that. It was called Democracy OS, and it was an open source voting system. And they went to the government and said, hey, we built this thing. And the government's like, we don't want that. We don't want transparency. Yeah. We don't want it. And that was actually the impetus for her to move to start Open Collective, because the government just wasn't interested in what we're saying. And I think what you're saying is like people are getting increasingly like, why am I paying taxes if the government's not doing anything or starting wars with my taxes? And it kind of puts us in a weird place. And I think politically, where people who traditionally were like, the government should be helping other people, now we're like, well, do I want the government to have my money? And I think that there is a void that's increasingly growing, which is stuff needs to still get done. And if we have to kind of work within the system, I think what you're really talking about is like, we need to build systems that actually deliver value and don't just, it's not just a fad or a phase, but actually it's going to have like long, it's like the public library system has been around for so long, and it's really like came out of that period of the public works projects. And like, that's because they had long lasting value. So yeah, I think it's a challenge, because in some sense we could go build these tools and go to the government and they say they don't want them. It feels like we need to build them in a way where the society is like, we need them and we want them. And it can't just be the government saying, oh, well, that's nice and all, but we're going to do it our way.
Well, remember that Pluto's out of bounds in the South. This is the time for radical new ideas in the voice of the people. So things are going to happen. Ideas are going to be ramped that wouldn't happen in other times. And another way things happen is they start very small, very local. So towns, cities, city councils, they have to manage a voting system. Why can't someone debut a pilot program for an open source voting system? Now, I'm not sure if there's like, I'm sure there's all sorts of red tape and, well, you have to be a XYZ compliant software and live in this box if we're going to use you for voting. Well, maybe, but I feel like there's going to be loopholes where maybe open source tools can show that they can work. I also feel like people are going to come to you. Like, if you show from an open source angle you can solve all these problems, suddenly people want you to solve other problems because it's advantageous for them to be solved. And the reason why we can complain rightfully for a while about the lack of transparency in the United States government, but I will say that some transparency we did have was taken away by DOGE. We had websites where you could review all the USAID documentation. You could review all of the federal budget. Did people look at it? Probably not, but you could go there. Now those websites have been discontinued. The little bit of transparency we have has been offline. We've not increased transparency. We've increased consolidation, confusion, and we have taken the decentralized data that the government had to protect the citizen, and we have mushed it together and given it to Palantir. And when you hear something like that from an open source angle, it's like, that is really bad, and I don't want that to happen. What can I do? Well, maybe there's going to be a loophole somewhere. There's going to be an opportunity for us to do something that is about building, I think. Farah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is really interesting, just thinking about it on so many different levels. But I guess it also brings me to the question on just the same kind of theme on what Joe was saying. Like, how would open source model translate into leadership? Would it be also like a decentralizing of power? I don't know if I'm over philosophizing, but just curious if it would be like a different model entirely,
There are people that are just innately good leaders, or they're good educators. We all have our skills. And sometimes the best leaders are the ones that do not want to be the boss, but the situation requires that they step up and be one.
Mm-hmm.
So good leaders are waylaid by most often by the spoils of the position. So if I'm in power, I can skim money off the top of the budget. I can entertain these sexual vices. I can have this excess because I am in a position where I suddenly have access to these things. And they don't realize that access to excess means that they are now controlled by those things. Mm. And believe it or not, the reason why people do that is, you can have lack of morals, not a good person, all those things. I honestly believe people turn to those things because they're looking for nourishment and they're looking for, they want to de-stress. So they don't know how to manage their internal lives and nourish themselves and their spirit. And so they are vulnerable to these excesses. That's the number one thing that happens to leaders. You can have a great leader, but they they're assaulted by their own personality and decision making that is maybe outside their job. So what do we do if we're a leader that has internal ethics and standards, and how are we going to say no if we're offered a bribe? Now, outside this country, taking bribes is seen as a good thing. It means you're the man, you're the boss. If you steal from someone, that means you're smart. And you should be rewarded for that, because it's the person's fault they were stolen from. They were stupid, but you're smarter than them. It's a different mindset, different way of thinking. But if we're going to say in the United States that there's standards and ethics and laws, a lot of it really has to come down to I have enough, and if you offered me a $50,000 bribe, it means nothing to me because it doesn't attract me and it doesn't help me do my work better. And it's very rare that you find these type of people. Now, I forget if he was, I don't know if he was a king or a prime minister of Spain. There was this guy in history, maybe Uruguay, South America or something.
The president, the prime minister there, is that who you're talking about?
This is a while ago. This is when photos were black and white.
Oh.
And he was so adamant that there be no question that he was not wasting the citizen money, that he insisted on paying for the family's housing, for their own food. He would get a receipt for everything to prove that he was not stealing from the citizen coffers, because it was very important to him. That was something that was very important to him, that he proved the division between state money and his personal money. And he was loved and respected for that because he was transparent with his financial standards. But that was him as a person. He decided to do that.
So would you say, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Would you say though, I guess I was more leaning into would you say that open source would still mean having a bit of a hierarchy in leadership, or would it be like everyone's a leader?
I am not a big fan of collective decisions because it can cause paralysis. Somebody needs to make a decision. What the collective can do is make sure that the standards and the energy of the project, the organization, is forefront. But you have to trust people to make a decision. If we can't make a decision until all 10 people are on a meeting, you have paralysis. And we also need to allow people to do what they do best. There are some people that are very good at leading a project. There are other people that I only want to code, and I want to do that for 10 hours a day, and that is my job. I do not want to be in charge. Let them do that. I think it's less about people leading as much as it is how are those leaders sharing information so that we are creating more leaders or people that are made stronger by this information. And how are we making sure that the decisions being made are for the common good of the project or the organization instead of only personal value? Because honestly, you should be maintaining enormous spiritual and personal benefit from making good decisions within an ethical context. Like your spirit should be nourished by that. And that's a huge bulwark against people. When you're unhappy and weak and frustrated and confused, that's when the attack comes, because they want to take you away from your project. They're like, oh, come over here. We have something better. Well, do they? How can you tell? Where's your discernment? Because you're off kilter. You're not in your space. So an open source way of looking at this is, how are we honoring people's autonomy and skill, but yet universally sharing the information and process by which they got there? Because we want more of these people. Like, we need more Jennifer Wilsons. We need more Joe Triggianis. We need more Justin Collins. We need more Megan Cadenas. But we get there by sharing and learning from each other.
I really like the way you put that, in terms of, having a disciplined approach, but having decision making. You know, it is really true that you can get into paralysis, but you really just have to see what the best thing is for the direction of the work and the group, and just do it. And if there's somebody that disagrees in there, that's happened to us before. And in fact, the whole group just sort of spends time explaining to that person why it's good for everyone to do this one thing. And so it's not a voting system. It's not a voting system.
Yeah.
It's not a top-down hierarchy. It's a collective that is envisioning the best thing. And I mean, they may be wrong, but there is a principle behind the decision anyway. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. You have to trust people to make a good decision. When they have shown themselves enough, you have got to trust people to make decisions. Because here's the other thing you have to do in leadership. You have to give people space. Because most often leaders make other people feel small because they need to feel big. If you give other people the opportunity to be big and to be in front and to make a decision and to run something, maybe. Like, there was a time on GDT where I managed the project board, and I prioritized issues, and, you know, with our lead engineer at the time, moved a lot of things around in the team. And I was getting busier, and I knew that the team was not as together and moving as fast as I knew it could. And I knew it was because, well, a few things. We probably need a different sort of lead engineer. And we needed someone else to run the project board who had more experience. And at that time, when I was ready to go do other things and relinquish this little job I had, a wonderful lead engineer showed up by the name of Vincent Steffens. And instead of being someone who needed to hold on with a strangle fist to that project board because I was in charge, I let that task go to someone else who was more experienced and could do a better job. So my life got bigger and full of interesting things, and his life got bigger and full of interesting things, because now he is able to do the job that he is very good at doing. So when you let people do stuff, when you let things go, let tasks go, oh, someone has showed up that is very good at this. I don't need to run this anymore.
Yeah.
You allow your life to get bigger and stronger, because it is time for something else to enter, because there's a different person to do that now.
This kind of touches on something I've been thinking about too, where I have found that in these areas that you're talking about, even if it might be difficult to let go of some things that you were in charge of because of whatever reason, and then you have to, the communication between women seems to be a lot easier. And so that kind of runs into the whole capitalist patriarchal system as well, where that communication is not so great with the men. And so I urge all men to communicate just more transparently. Just talk about your feelings. It's okay. It's okay. It's scary for everybody, but it's always, always better to do.
Yeah. Well, I think men communicate differently as well. I mean, I work with a lot of men in this field, and a lot of times when the space is not shame based, where you are not at risk of losing face, is when the men will start showing up and communicating. Because women don't tend to shame themselves for sharing feelings, ideas, all of that sort of thing. Like, that's part of, female culture. And it has to do with, biological tendency towards children. And women also have a certain level of discernment, which also comes from, I need to protect the child. Like, we're born with this tendency. But in male circles, the shame, and not that women don't experience shame, like we can have a whole discussion on that, but in male circles, especially in career or, idea groups, there's a very heavy possibility of shame, derision, someone stealing your idea, someone not helping you. You might lose face, or, I didn't do it as fast as him, and so I lost face. That is a big weight on men. So women really support each other, usually. Men sometimes don't support each other. Or if they do, it can be two-faced. Like, I'm going to support you, but it's only because I'm getting something out of it. So when men have the opportunity to be in a truly neutral space where there's just enough competition because everyone is trying to help each other succeed and it's not based on shame, that's when men open up. And open source, I think in general, is good for that, because we tend to not approach things from shame. We tend to approach it from, we have a problem to solve, and we have a special skill in knowing how to solve it. And I think a lot of men gravitate towards open source because there's a neutrality here. There is maybe less games. Here's the problem. I can see the workflow. It's all public, and the shame chances is lower. Joe, would you say I'm correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that open source, like, there's more solidarity and there is generally less kind of like ego. And so it feels more collaborative, and you're going to be more likely to kind of want to be in a place where you're not constantly being judged by the people around you, versus I think in some corporate environments, there's like different groups of people, and we're, it's kind of like going back to high school and being in cliques sometimes where, which does happen in open source communities too, definitely, like it depends on the culture for sure. But I think in general, open source is a lot more accepting and being like, hey, yeah, you're just just trying it out, like give it a shot. So yeah, I think there's less ego.
Yeah. We're big on process. Like, we all got to get there. We all got to figure this out. We're going to process it, but show your process. Like, write this down so we can all learn from it, because I'm sure there's a bug in here that we haven't seen. So you got to write it down. Okay, we are over time, so let's do one more question. Justin?
I'm going to upset you, but I'm going to say you're wrong. And whether you're right or wrong doesn't matter, but how did that make you feel? Can you accept being told you're wrong, first of all? Second, I'm going to say we're speaking in stereotypical, outside looking in, but I believe if we dialed it in closer to an individual assessment, what you and I believe Jennifer were speaking of is historically in the workplace, the male majority there, and what you see now is you're speaking of men that interact or share feelings or unable to do those things, that are insecure. And I'm going to reach on this one with my own opinion, but men are typically more likely to take risk and put themselves in a job role that they are not capable of. And
Yes.
for lack of better words, they fake it till they make it. And
Yes.
so, like a Chihuahua that barks a lot without much bite, you'll have managerial roles with people who are not experienced. They may be capable, but what you're seeing is an insecurity with that is showing a lack of experience.
Yeah.
To stereotype and say that men do this, what you're used to is incapable or inexperienced men. There's a entire workforce of men who are open, who are accepting, and are supportive, but they've been there, they've done that, they've stood
Yeah.
back up. And so I think what you're saying is one side of the reality. And when you see that, or when you get that reaction from a male figure in a job or a working relationship, it may be telling you more than you're acknowledging.
Right. Right. I think that a lot of times the fake it till you make it is because maybe this guy wasn't supported in his process. Did anyone bother to train him or teach him? Did you keep sending him to the store for the wrong thing because you thought it was funny? What if you just helped him learn? He probably would be fine. I think that insecurity is the number one wound that men experience, and it holds them back and it makes them suffer. Insecurity is so rampant in this society for men, and it destroys our relationships, destroys our government, destroys everything. We need our men to be strong. We need them to be secure. And I could talk for hours on that. But Justin, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We expect women to support each other and have this community. I find myself working less with women and more with men, and understanding how men process all these different places they are in their lives, and how we could be supporting them better instead of like treating them like a piece of shit.
Okay, so I guess one of the point I'm trying to make is, if you what y'all are describing, if you're working with men like that, then you need to raise your standard and work with men who don't act that way, or wait, you're dealing with people who aren't capable. So, rise above that is my point. There are men out there that do it. There are functioning organizations and high level organizations that do not operate at what I'm hearing you explain. And I'm just saying I see it. So let that be a tell that the people that are treating you like that are people you don't need to be associating with, and it's time to step up to the next level.
And I'm very fortunate that 99.9% of the time in open source world, I encounter the most amazing attitudes from any gender. And I encounter helpfulness. I encounter curiosity, people with ideas, people that want to help, people that want to build something. And the reason why I've stayed in this community and continue to be so passionate about it is I see so much goodness around me all the time. I see people trying to be better, wanting to learn. How do we create standards out of thin air for this industry product where no standards exist? Like, these are huge problems we're trying to solve, and people are committed to it. And that's a wonderful thing to be around. It's very inspiring. It's nourishing to the spirit. So we are almost at 10 o'clock. Rob, do you want to do any closing remarks?
I want to thank Victoria and thanks everybody for the lively conversation. Victoria, maybe you could post your LinkedIn information one more time in the chat as we close here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. We have this as a monthly event with different speakers. Once again, Public Invention is a US 501c3 public charity, and we could really use your small donations because it helps show the IRS that we are indeed a public charity. It's also the case that we are holding a major event in Austin, Texas on Saturday, June 13th, an in real life conference with a full day of speakers and hands-on demos and possibly workshops. We're still working on that right now. So if you happen to be in the Austin area or close, I encourage you to look us up on Eventbrite and consider coming to that. This video will be placed on YouTube probably by Monday. Megan, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Victoria, again, for taking the time to create this wonderful seminar and present it. I just wanted to make an additional note that she's sharing her professional connection through LinkedIn. If anyone would like to connect further with her or isn't quite directly connected at this point, but would like to be, that's the best mode to reach out to her. As well, I would like to say, if you're a supporter of our organization and are interested in collaborating with us more or supporting our efforts, I suggest you take a look at the link for the volunteers for our in-person conference this summer, as well as our website to see how we can better collaborate together. So thank you, everyone.
Or just send me email. Everyone else does.
That too.
Rob loves email. Thank you so much to everybody for coming. Justin is a new person to the open source community. I know him through Hurricane Helene work. So Justin, thank you so much for coming and being part of the discussion. It was really wonderful to have you here.